I like to think Gaia was starting to feel very uncomfortable at that point. She could see what was going to happen. You see, the view is that Gaia is a real intelligence. So I think when I say, I'm sure Jules would think of it like this as well. When I say, or one says, Gaia felt uncomfortable by the 1960s, I really mean it. She did feel uncomfortable. You know, I mean, she's a great intelligence beyond our understanding. She's not a mechanism. She's a soul, anima mundi, the great soul.
Absolutely.
So by that time, say 1965 or so, she realized, if I may say so humbly, that she had to speak to the culture directly once more. And she tried speaking through the poets in England anyway, Wordsworth, Coleridge. Wonderful though they were, no policies were made according to their understanding of nature, the animacy of nature. They were just considered wonderful entertainers. But it didn't stop the Industrial Revolution, and it didn't stop the destruction of nature. So by the 1960s, Gaia is thinking, poets didn't work, artists didn't work. Okay, I think I'd better find a scientist. After all, this culture has become a totally scientific culture. They're only going to listen to a scientist. So I like to think that she looked inside the minds and souls of all the scientists around in the 1960s for one who could speak for her, or rather for one through whom she could speak to the culture, Western culture, modernity, to explain to them that they were destroying the very basis of their own existence and destroying this beautiful evolutionary process which she'd been going through for billions of years. Anyway, to cut a long story short, that scientist was James Lovelock. Or let's put it this way, Gaia reformulated herself into scientific language through Lovelock. And his basic idea, or the basic idea that she gave him, there are 4 basic components. See, the number 4 is very important here. There are 4 basic components in the Earth as a system. So he used scientific language, remember, because he was one of the greatest scientists of all time. I think that's beyond doubt, really. So remember, he's a brilliant scientist, capable in chemistry, biology, mathematics. I mean, really extraordinary. So he said the Earth has 4 components. All the living beings, which we call the biosphere. Then there's the atmosphere, the air, and there's the water, and there are the rocks. Those 4 components. And Lovelock said when these 4 components, or rather Gaia said through Lovelock, when these 4 components interact with each other through what we call in science feedback relationships, and the biota start affecting the atmosphere and the water and the rocks, and then they feed back to determine which of the biota can live in the conditions which they've created for themselves, then something unexpected emerges from these relationships. You see the primacy of relationships, and that emergent property, as we call it in science, said Lovelock, is the ability of the whole Earth, not as a machine, not as a dead mechanism, but as a living organism, that the ability of the whole Earth as a living organism to regulate key aspects of her surface, such as her temperature, distribution of key elements, etc. So, for example, if the oxygen content gets too high, then the whole planet sort of senses that, and the biota respond, and they act to reduce the oxygen content in relationship with the other 3 components, the water, the atmosphere, and the rocks. The same for many other surface conditions. So basically, he was telling us through scientific language, telling us the ancient myth, the ancient story, the ancient understanding that the Earth is a great living being, an organism, alive. I mean, he wouldn't go so far as a scientist to say he was sentient, but I would.